President Cyril Ramaphosa has delivered his keynote address at the virtual 2021 Human Rights Day commemoration today. This year's theme is the Year of Charlotte Maxeke, promoting human rights in the age of COVID-19. But is her legacy being upheld, and what is the relevance to South Africa's youth of the legacy of Charlotte Maxeke? Ambassador for the Charlotte Mannya Maxeke Institute, Zulaikha Patel, joins us now to talk about this. Zulaikha, good evening, and thank you very much for your time tonight here on the Newsfeed Late Night.
Good evening to you too. Thank you so much for having me.
First and foremost, I mean, when we are talking of Charlotte Maxeke, what legacy are we talking about when we, for example, talk about what she believed, what she taught, and what motivated her?
We're talking about a groundbreaking legacy of a woman who defied all odds thrown at her at a time when women were told that they belonged in the kitchen and did not belong at the forefront of fighting for this country's liberation struggle. We're talking about a groundbreaking legacy of a woman who was unapologetic and fearless and had the audacity to step into rooms, the necessary audacity and fearlessness to step into rooms which women were left out of, deliberately so, and demand a place for women, and actually demand that you cannot speak of liberation without women in the forefront. And so we're speaking of a very groundbreaking legacy which should be known through all corners of this world, from Cape to Cairo, Johannesburg to LA to Tokyo.
Yeah, and how relevant is this legacy to the struggles of young people today? I mean, her views, for example, on education and her passion on education and how that was displayed.
You know, her views are very relevant today to young people because there was actually a time where she wrote a letter speaking on how colonialism had destroyed the black family structure, and she spoke about how young people were affected by that, and she spoke of how young people should not be left in the streets and young people belong in classrooms and lecture halls getting an education. And today we see the struggles where young people are demanding demanding free and equal access to education. And so her legacy is relevant to young people in a sense whereby currently today, young people born post-94 are experiencing a South Africa whereby a system which was once constitutionalized has been privatized, and they're currently now battling unemployment. Young people who are graduates and hold master's degrees are experiencing unemployment, and particularly black youth who are affected by unemployment and affected by not getting a free equal access to education, and they are held back by the structural inequalities being the financial and socio-economic circumstances holding them back from accessing education. And so her legacy is one that is relevant because she had a passion for education, as she was the first black woman to obtain a BSc degree in science in 1901 in the States. And so she, at a time where women were already told that they could not obtain an education, she actually left the country to go and get one in another country, oceans away. And so her legacy is one that is relevant today, given the current circumstances of young people, which are not very different from the generations that came before my generation.
Two things. She came back with that education. The first thing that she did is actually build a school in her own community to educate the children in her community. Not only that, but yes, her activism, her active resistance was awakened and activated. What inspiration should young people today draw just from those two actions of Charlotte Maxeke?
You know, the two things we should draw from her is, firstly, we should draw from her fearlessness where she had such a fearless spirit to walk into rooms in which she was denied access into those rooms, and not only demand a seat for herself, but demand a seat for all her people. She wasn't demanding a seat for just herself as Charlotte Maxeke. She was demanding a seat for all women, all black women at the time, demanding a seat for young people as well. And so we should draw that fearlessness as young people to walk into rooms in which we are denied access and demand our rightful place in those those rooms where we belong. And secondly, we should draw from her spirit of unifying people, because one of her quotes, which is a quote very close to my heart and also very close to the institution's heart, in which she says, and if you can rise, bring someone with you. As young people, we should be taking that quote and putting it into practice, because the only way we are going to fight these injustices and actually see victory is when we unite as young people, when we come together collectively as young people and utilize our collective power, because as young people we have a lot of collective ground power, given that we are the majority of the population. And so we should be bringing ourselves together and rising together, like that quote says, and if you can rise, bring someone with you. As young people, we should be coming together collectively and rising together, not just as individuals, but collectively, and bringing other young people from our communities and uniting ourselves as a united force.
What do you say, I mean, when you listen, for example, to a stat that says the nation is seeing a 13% rise in human rights complaints, and one of the issues that are not a reality right now in South Africa is us being united in our diversity? What would Charlotte Maxeke say, or what would she do in a context of a South Africa that looks and behaves like that?
You know, I believe that if Charlotte Maxeke was here with us today, she would unite people. She would go onto the ground. She would go onto the ground and unite people. And I don't think we're seeing enough of that. We're seeing way too much of the speaking in isolated rooms in which the mass majority of our people do not have access into those rooms. When seminars, indabas, and events are hosted to speak on changing the circumstances, the material circumstances of the people of our country, the majority which we are speaking for are excluded from those events. You'll have an event that speaks to ending violence against women, hosted in Sandton, but the majority of women in Soweto, women in KwaDukuza, women in KwaNdebele are excluded from that because they don't have access to be present at that event. And so one thing she would do is not isolate herself from her people and actually go out into the ground and unite the people on the ground. And I think that what we need to see more of is less of the isolated meetings and seminars whereby we speak for people but without them present. We need to speak for people with them present, fully present, and we need to go onto the ground and engage with our people and shy away from isolating ourselves from the mass majority of our people.
It's the year of Charlotte Maxeke and South Africa's attempt to keep her legacy alive. And we are in a pandemic and in a time where we are seeing challenges around vaccines. I mean, how do you marry this legacy and some of the challenges that we are going through right now? And how relevant is that legacy to those challenges?
The legacy is relevant to the challenges because what she spoke to was justice, equity, and equality, and that's not what we're seeing now. What we're seeing is that inequalities that were existent in our society, racialized inequalities and inequalities on the basis of sexual orientation and gender, those inequalities are deepening, and her legacy is relevant because it speaks against those inequalities and speaks to the attainment of justice. And for example, currently we're experiencing a big inequality with access to the vaccine, and how her legacy is even relevant to that is that why she was a proud Pan-Africanist. She was one who advocated for Africa being independent from the Western world. And what we're seeing today is that as the African continent, we have means and power and resources essentially because we have the ground power. We have the majority of the globe's population is on the African continent. And what we're seeing is that we are still deeply, heavily reliant on the Western world to give us a vaccine when we could be producing our own, when we could be coming together as the continent, uniting and sharing resources that we have on the continent and producing our own instead of being so deeply reliant onto the Western world. And so her Pan-African legacy, in which she spoke very, very profoundly and passionately on Africa liberating itself and being independent from the Western world, that's where it's relevant to today's struggle with the vaccine, is that we have means as the African continent. We just have to utilize our power and realize the power that we have already on the ground and unite and see and begin to think outside of the box which was constructed by colonialism to see ourselves only primarily reliant on the Western world. What we need to begin to do is think out of that box and break down the walls of that box, as she would have done, is bulldozed those walls and thought outside that box and actually worked towards uniting the continent and the resources that we do have on the continent, and work towards uniting the continent to produce its own vaccine, to serve its own people, so that we do not have instances where we do not have enough of the vaccine for all the people of the continent.
Now, Zulaikha, finally, before I let you go yourself as the ambassador of the Charlotte Maxeke Institute, what are you doing and the work that you will continue to do to keep that legacy alive?
You know, one thing for me, out of all our programs, is there's two particular programs that are very close to my heart as a young person, which is the Bring Her Up program, which focuses on the well-being of the girl child in under-resourced and underdeveloped communities in our country, whereby we will, with the 150th, we will be expanding, hopefully. We currently focus on five regions in the country, among them being Freedom Park, Kliptown, Hammanskraal, Davidson, and others as well. And we have this program where we take in girl children in the area and introduce them to role models, as well as in the institute we do have ambassadors who are psychologists, and we focus on the well-being of the girl child and focus on the upbringing of the girl child and ensuring that the girl child is not alone and has the necessary support needed. And what we've actually done is, given the circumstances of our country, we've expanded that program beyond the girl child and introduced the Bring Him Up program to also focus on the well-being of a young black boy child, because we cannot abandon young black boy children in our society, because what we do want to change is change the circumstances of our country. And to do so, we have to ensure that we raise a generation of responsible men who are not going to grow up to be abusers and be perpetrators of gender-based violence. And in doing so, we also have to focus on the upbringing and the well-being of the young black boy child. And so we've expanded the Bring Her Up program to Bring Him Up as well. Yeah. And so those two programs are programs that I've focused quite a lot on, and programs that are very close to my heart in the Institute, as well as the introduction of a youth forum. What we're going to do is we're also going to be introducing a youth forum in Ngqungquthela, whereby we will be bridging the gap between rural and urban youth, to get youth together in a forum to discuss pressing African issues, issues of socio-economic issues on the continent, and bring voices together, uniting youth voices to discuss those pressing issues. And so those are just three programs which I'm involved in and are quite close to my heart as a young person.
Zulaikha Patel, I appreciate your nice chat, and thank you for the inspiration you shared with us here tonight. That's the ambassador of the Charlotte Mannya Maxeke Institute, Zulaikha Patel. When we